Welcome back to episode 42 of the Leeds Rhinos Podcast. It's a Thursday, which means it's our Q&A edition, and I'm really looking forward to our special guest today. My name is Phil Daly, I'm the head of media and PR, and I'm joined by our assistant S&C coach, Charlie Venables. And Charlie's probably someone you've seen around the team on match days, out in the field helping the team, but maybe not show too much about you, Charlie. When we're going to resolve that in this Q&A edition, find out what you're up to, what your background is, and how fans can get to know your role, and maybe if it's younger fans thinking about careers in sport. One of the potential avenues for you to get involved in a career in sport. Thanks for joining us. Remember to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts to stay in touch with all things Leeds Rhinos. We've got some great new podcasts coming out shortly. We're going to be filming the new edition of the Knockon Effect, Tom Nicholson-Watt and Jared O'Connor, and they've got the McCormack brothers into studio, so that should be interesting. A bit of sibling rivalry between those two, and that'll be coming out next week. So make sure you subscribe, and then you don't miss out on any of the great content that's coming out from Leeds Rhinos over the next few weeks. Remember to give us a 5-star review so we can continue to climb those podcast charts and spread the word about all things Leeds Rhinos and rugby league to the wider country, and let people know what we're doing here at the Rhinos. Charlie, great to have you here and chatting things. We've got plenty of questions, a few ones being fired in by the players, I think, as well. So we'll try and dodge a few bullets there. But just give everyone a bit of background on yourself, how you came to be here at the Rhinos, and you know your career to date.
Yeah, cheers, Phil. Thanks for having me. First of all, being at the Rhinos now. This is my 4th season on a full-time basis, but started as an intern in 2021, that 2021 season where we got to a semi-final, then started full-time that pre-season after that. From before that, I was a student at Leeds Beckett, started that 2016 as a sports science student, so I moved to Leeds then, was there for 5 years, did a part-time master's when I finished my undergrad, and then that led into being at the Rhinos from that 2021 season that was still around COVID. So my master's pretty much was, everything went online. I was not doing a lot because we couldn't go out and do a lot, but I knew the S&C that was here at the time, Dan Grange, who's now at North Queensland Cowboys. So I basically said to him, if you need a hand doing anything, whether it's coaching or whether it's just coming in basically to clean the gym, I've got a lot of free time and I can do what you need me to do. So yeah, came in that April of 2021, and it's been a good journey since then.
Yeah, it's great. I think there's two really important points. There's the relationship we have with Leeds Beckett University, and we spoke about on the playing side and that pathway there is for players there, but also for undergrads and those who are going further on their education. The link with the Rhinos, we've had lots of people who come in on that intern basis and get a chance to be involved in professional sport. And your second one there is, and we spoke about this previously, that opportunity to volunteer to build up your CV, so you've not just got your qualification, you've actually got that real world experience as well. Presumably that helps with the next step in your career.
Yeah, I think it's really good. That just gave me an opportunity and experience basically to get my foot in the door of a professional club like Leeds Rhinos, and not many places where you're at universities that you actually get the chance to do that. So the connection between being at Leeds Beckett, but then I knew Dan previously from playing with him at Leeds Tykes as well, so he basically had me in to do as much as I could, and then, yeah, eventually got the opportunity to come in on a full-time basis after that.
I'm glad you mentioned Leeds Tykes. That's what you do in your spare time. You're part of the Leeds Tykes squad that's got promotion back up to the 3rd tier of English club rugby, and you also played a bit last year for the reserves as well. So you not only do as I say, but do as I do as well.
Yeah, we're deep in pre-season at the minute at Tykes, so I'm a bit tired, pretty haggard at the minute, but we get a break next week, so that'll be quite nice. The boys have had a hard 4 weeks training, so get a week off. But no, yeah, the stint in the reserves was good fun. I've not had a chance to do it this year, probably because we've had the numbers and the academy and the reserve teams have been going so well that they've just not really needed me to fill in or play. So, Chev, there is games left. I am available if I'm needed, but nah, it was a good opportunity for me to actually experience what the guys go through, having never played rugby league before. Always played rugby union growing up, but always watched rugby league, but never had the chance to play it just from where I was from. But no, it gave me definitely a newfound respect for what the boys actually put themselves through. can safely say the first game that I played in the reserves, the first time I've ever cramped playing rugby. Never cramped playing rugby union, but I just think the nature of rugby league and the conditioning aspect of it definitely gave me a newfound respect for the boys and what they do.
And do you think that's informed your how you work with them as well in terms of going forward? That's sort of some lessons you've learned about things you can do with them.
Yeah, definitely. I just think it also gives you like a better understanding of the game itself. Because people probably look at rugby union and rugby league and think there are a lot of similarities, but there are also a lot of differences. So definitely gave me a better understanding of, instead of just watching rugby league, actually immersing myself in it and actually having to understand the plays, the shapes, like sort of things that guys have to do to be prepared and be ready for a game. So no, it's definitely a good experience and one that I'm glad I actually got to do.
Very good. We'll dive into the questions. When we announced yesterday you were coming on, we've had quite a few through, and obviously a real insight, because there's a lot of people out there who play the game, and we mentioned that you help the players from that rehab point of view back to playing. So there's a few questions around things like that. But we'll go to our first question. You mentioned that you're in the middle of pre-season training with Tykes, and I think this probably informs this question. It's come from a certain Brodie Croft. Right. I don't know if you've heard of this chap. Is it true you're the reason for egg price inflation?
Very possibly at the minute. Like I say, I'm in the middle of pre-season, so I'm eating a lot at the minute. Mornings down there, Gary's putting on a hell of a spread at breakfast, so I'm just making the most of it, especially on a day like today where I'm in today and then in training this evening, so I'm trying to make the most of it.
Very good. And then he had a more serious one. Well, maybe not. Is it true Crofts' gym playlist contributes to the accelerated rehab progress?
I'm not sure it enhances accelerated rehab. I'm pretty sure the gym tunes, when the full squad are in there, it does enhance what they're lifting, but the vibes in rehab are more on Tom Nicholson-Watton's vibes of chilled out country music.
A bit more laid back.
You can actually speak and have a conversation with each other, whereas when Crofty's in there on the tunes, it's pretty loud and pretty hectic. So
give us an insight into the certain tracks we can find on a Croft playlist.
Oh, I don't ever actually think there's a specific track. It's normally he goes on SoundCloud, right, finds a DJ's mix and just puts it on and lets it take care of itself.
Yeah.
So,
cheats, you mean?
Cheats, yeah. Basically, he won't like me saying that, but he might claim that they're his mixes, but I think they're just ones that he finds and then goes, now we can stick that on and that'll do a job.
Very good. Excellent. Well, Crofty, you'll have a right to reply going again on the Q&A next week. Question about in terms of that rehab element, do you do it moderately in terms of how we get them back to playing, or what's the intensity of that process?
Yeah, so that process, varying dependent on the injury, can be a varied amount of time, varied amount of amount they'll do with certain aspects of different people. So at the minute, the general gist of what they do in rehab is they'll stay with the physios to a point to get their loading to a certain point in terms of total distance, accelerations, decelerations, and certain things that they'll need to tick off in terms of maximal velocities and those sort of aspects. And then when the physios are happy that they've ticked all those boxes and they've been through that process, they'll come to me and some sessions with Grixie as well that we'll collaborate on, and it'll be basically an intro back into rugby that we'll do with them for 2 or 3 weeks, depending on, again, the length of the injury and how long guys have been out, just so then guys are then feeling the nature of playing rugby again before they're then sieved back into full training. It's like a bit of an intro into sort of the chaos that they can expect to train in. If you think of a continuum of chaos and controlled, everything that they'll do with the physios will be really controlled and really managed, whereas if you go into full training or a gameplay, like you can't control anything, and that's just chaotic. Like whatever happens. So trying to get somewhere in that middle ground when they do these sessions with me and Grixie, that means they can carry on building their load up gradually over a certain period of time, but then they're a little bit more prepared for the chaos when they get back into training. The best example of that at the minute is Ned McCormack, that you'll see on the podcast after. Like, he's just done 2 full weeks with me after being with the physios, and he started integrating back into training this week. So that integration process means that on our lighter days that we had, say on Monday this week, we had a G-4 session where he was basically in it because it's pretty light. It's team flowing unopposed sets, it's edge v edge, it's unit skill, which is manageable, and the chaos isn't necessarily there. And then the G-3 session that we had, which is like our main training day, he's in some bits of that, out of some bits of it. So he's managed and integrated into parts of that. And then the back end of this week, he'll do, he's done one this morning, he'll do another session with me and Grixie tomorrow to then have a look at going back into full training next week before he's then on that road to being playing again. So
yeah, and an interesting one on that is from a question from someone called the storekeeper. What's the hardest thing about the rehab from injury? Is it strength or mobility? So presumably, depending on what certain injuries are, they can continue to do some stuff in the gym, but they might lose it in other areas. How do you manage getting them back to getting to full strength right across the board?
Yeah, so I think both of those aspects that you mentioned are important, the strength and mobility, especially for the injuries that we've been having. We've been having a number of them hamstring injuries where the mobility around the hamstring and the flexibility and the actual range and length of that hamstring is really important. But what then we're trying to manage is when they're on that return to play process or return to training process, is that there's not really any strength deficit either, whether that's through eccentric strength or isometric strength that we measure down at the Kirkstall training ground, that those deficits aren't necessarily there. So that ticks a box for strength. While they're in that rehab process, obviously, depending on what the injury is, if it's a lower limb injury, they can work really hard on their upper body strength, especially those younger lads that have got the time and they can just put on some size, some mass, some strength in that aspect. Or if it's an upper limb injury, vice versa, the same with a lower limb. So it's just working around the injury early in the process, because the physios will manage a lot of the actual injury site where they can do a lot more than we can. But then it's, for me as an S&C, working on everything else around that isn't injured, trying to optimize and make everything as good as it possibly can be in all aspects.
Brilliant stuff. Someone asked more specifically there, what kind of stretches and strength work are done regularly on the shoulders?
It's difficult to stretch the shoulder because it's a joint, so there's not actually anything there that you can stretch to increase its length. We'll do a lot of shoulder capacity work in terms of rotator cuff and the actual structures around the shoulder that we're trying to make as strong as possible, but also there's a lot of stretching you can do around the pec and around the rear delt to actually make your shoulder move through a greater range. So that's just the best way of trying to not get caught. If you're tackling, if you're getting caught back there, that's when you're going to be vulnerable to having shoulder injuries. If your shoulder's getting tucked up in contact, that's going to like pressure it in that sort of area. So it's just trying to make everything as robust as possible. We'll do a lot of, like I say, a lot of scapular work, try and pull your shoulder blades back to make you strong in that position. Just trying to be strong through all ranges of motion around the shoulder, just so any sort of position you can get put in a tackle or in a carry, that you're strong and stable in that position.
Yeah, I think there when you say there about you can't do something specific about the shoulder itself, and I think another example of that is obviously Morgan Gann had his issues with concussion last year, and that was the problem, that you can't really do much about that issue. But what I found was fascinating, the work you were doing with Morgan in terms of building up all that strength around his neck and his shoulders and his pec around. So when he does go into contact, he's got the best possible armory to deal with that, to try and alleviate some of the issues around the concussion.
Yeah, the concussions are an interesting one because, like research has suggested, you found that increases in neck strength definitely can reduce the risk of concussion occurring. So for Morgan, I think it was definitely a case of he'd missed so much time in terms of his physical development because he played so early and played a lot so early. You think about it, that time when he started playing at 17 through to where he's now, he's just still only 21, which is crazy. But he missed that really important period of time, 17 to 19, where a lot of guys will put on a lot of muscle mass, and because they're not playing that much necessarily, they've got that time to do it. Whereas because he was playing pretty much every week, he missed that really important time. But he's, as it looks through the other side of that now, like he had that year out last year to really work on himself physically. I think you can see from him growing as a man, he's definitely developed both around his shoulders, around his chest, around his back, around his neck. Like he just looks more like a man if you see him walking around. I still like see occasionally, I have memories like pop up from 4 years ago, like of pictures when I first came in. I'm like, you look at it and you go, wow, Gano literally was a kid. And you look at him now and you go, he is a physical specimen. So no.
And someone I think you'll be spending a lot of time in the next few months is Micah Siva. Obviously had his ACL injury earlier in the year. He started his rehab. He's gone back home for a couple of months, but then a couple of weeks, and now he's coming back next week, and then he's right the way through for the start of for next season. Then those 8, we've got a few questions about ACL injuries. Are they particularly tricky ones when the physios sign them off and pass them over to you in terms of developing that? Because presumably you've got to do that. That is a slow process, presumably.
Yeah, there's what you've got to respect with the ACLs and any other injury is like the actual healing process and the time that anatomy does take to heal. Like I say, Micah spent most of his time before he went away just spending time with the physios around the injury site. They're trying to get his range back, trying to get his strength in that sort of range, and that's what he was sent away with to Australia with, to get as much strength back in that injured side as he could, because he was tracking really well before he left. So, and it's just trying to manage any sort of swelling or any sort of things that can interfere with that. When he gets back, it'll be a collaborative process between myself and the physios to carry on with that process of building up his strength to make sure, like I mentioned before, minimizing any sort of deficit that he's got in that sort of knee during movements like single leg counter movement jumps, any sort of running processes that he does, trying to prepare him as best for that. So yeah.
And we've touched on the rehab element of your role during the season, but off season is an incredibly busy period for you in terms of technique with the boys and working with that. I've seen you down there, particularly around the sprint techniques and angles of running and things like that. I mean, just before we move on to the specifics of that, in terms of injuries like ACL on those, is getting technique right a key part to try and help alleviate some of those injuries?
Yeah, to minimise the risk, you're definitely trying to enhance people's technical proficiency. I think, it's like I mentioned before, that control and that chaos continuum. Certain aspects when you get into games and training, the chaotic nature, you're never going to be able to manage it. But what we can do in the off season and the pre-season is try and prepare them technically for those positions that they're going to find themselves in. A deceleration for us in like the pre-season process is a big part of enhancing the guys' physical capacity and capabilities when they get to that, which if we can enhance that to a point where we can be comfortable and happy that they can all decelerate proficiently, accelerate proficiently, and then put those two movements together, you're going to minimize as much risk as you can.
I remember Ash Handley talking last year. I think from a layman's point of view, if you're looking at things, deceleration seems to be the counterintuitive, that you just want your players to go as fast as they can, but of course you've got to stop at some point, otherwise you're going to run through a brick wall. So controlling that. But I remember Ash Handley last year talking about the work he did with you in pre-season in terms of early in his career, he would just if he saw a gap, he was just going as fast as he could. But everyone will remember that try in round one last year against Salford, where he went as fast as he could, but then actually decelerated. Nene McDonald comes across to try and tackle him, and then he pulled away again and scored probably the try of the season in round one. That must give you a lot of satisfaction when you see the hard work you've put in with the player coming off in a chaotic game situation. Yeah,
it just shows that if we can put guys in those sort of situations in training, then they can have a toolkit and express themselves when they get on the field. Ash is an interesting one because you look at him and he's tall, he's rangy, and you think, a lot of what he does is around how fast he can move. But what I think he does really well is he finds an optimal sort of speed to move at, which means that he's always in control of a situation. That means if there's space there to take, like there was in that sort of instance in that Salford game, he can then use his maximal velocity and his speed to take the space that's there. But then what people I don't think give him enough credit for is like the power and how he creates space in his yardage carries. I think he's one that will always be able to find a soft shoulder, find a quick play of the ball, because he can poke his nose through, and that's just all about his little short space footwork. And then I think if you can contrast him to somebody like Lockie, who definitely creates a lot more of his own space, because when he's carrying the ball back, he's obviously faced with a kick chase line that is all set in front of him, and he's got to try and create some space in that line himself. So if you watch like Lockie, I call it creating space, because he has to decelerate to re-accelerate into some sort of space that he's trying to create himself, whereas he's perceiving things a lot differently to the way that Ash might perceive them, where they see space differently and they're trying to use the toolkits that they have to try and have an optimal result in that.
Good. Question from a certain James Donaldson. And Dono asks, what player is the hardest work in rehab? When I first read that, I thought it said hardest working, but I think he's suggesting who's most punished for you when you're doing the rehab. I don't know if he's nominating himself there, by the way.
Might possibly be. I'm not really sure that any of them are that hard work, because what they all want when they come into rehab is to get back on the field as quick as they can. Mentioned Crofty was an interesting one to rehab because he just wants to be back as quickly as he can, and he wants to know why he's doing everything in that rehab process to get back on the field, which is good as a practitioner because it means that you've got to justify everything that you're doing and explain it to him, which isn't a bad thing because it makes you think then you need to be doing the right things and actually making sure that they're optimal for the people that you're rehabbing. Not really sure because as long as you have a decent group in rehab at the same time, they all sort of gel with each other and bounce off each other, so none of them actually become that hard work because they've got other boys in there to help each other out. Mike is probably one that you just need to be on top of all the time and watch everything that he does, just because he just needs to be told, and he'll do something, and if you feel like he can do more, you need to tell him that he can do more, just because he probably underestimates himself a little bit.
Yeah. And someone who's unfortunately spent more time in rehab than most is Max Simpson. And one of the questions is, what's the most complex rehab you've had to do? And we were chatting just beforehand that Max, getting him back to being on the field has probably been that for you.
Yeah, I think the whole process around Max with being similar to Gano in that he was really young when he debuted, missed a lot of training time in his youth development because of COVID, and then came into the first team environment, made his debut, got an injury after playing 4 or 5 games in his ankle, which meant that season was done. Came back into the pre-season in 2022, 21-22 season and was absolutely killing it. Played in the Boxing Day game there and looked really good. Looked like he was going to kick on. And then his ACL injury happened. And I think the physios and doctors will be able to tell you a lot more than I can, but it just, when the tendon didn't take in his knee from his graft that he had, a patella tendon graft to fix his ACL, it didn't take. So I was saying before that his actual quad strength was there and the size of his quad was there, the muscle mass was there, but he couldn't use it because he'd get this pain in the tendon around his knee, which was for myself and Fergie very complex, and we could, whatever we tried to get that pain to go away, it didn't really work. So that's when last September he went for a surgery in Sweden to have that patella. I wouldn't be able to tell you what actually they did to the patella tendon, but it came back, and since then he's not had that pain, so it's meant that he's been able to get back into training and actually use the quad strength and the mass that he's got. So he's on the other side of that now, but yeah, that was definitely at the time the most complex and probably most difficult one to try and understand, because Max as well is a complex character. He'll just come in and get on with his work, and you never really never seems down, never seems that up, but would come in every day, do exactly as he's told and crack on with everything that he needed to do. So he's definitely on the other side of it now, and it's really good to see, and hopefully he's back on the field again soon.
Yeah, I think Max can't wait to see him back out there. And I think what he's been through over the last 2-3 years or so, I think once he gets out there and he's doing the rugby stuff, the mental fortitude he's built up over the last couple of years, I don't think there's anything going to get in his way in terms of his progress. Hopefully that happens as soon as possible. Question from Harrison: what made you want to get into this job role?
That's an interesting one because I played a lot growing up, rugby union wise, and then I was involved with Leicester when I was 14 to 17. I was involved at Sale from 18 to 20 whilst I was at university at the same time. And when I was doing my sports science degree, I was probably doing it with quite an open mind, not really not really knowing what sort of area of expertise I would like to go into, but more doing it because the sports science degree was so open and there was so many different branches of it that I was like, oh, I'll find something here that I can do. And then what I then thought when I finished that degree, I was like, oh, well, there's 300 people here that have got the same sports science degree as me. And that's just at one university in the country. So how many other people are that have done the same thing? So stayed to do my master's in S&C. Just found that I really enjoyed strength training, conditioning training, that sort of side of being a player. So it like piqued my interest. And then, yeah, once I got into the actual learning and what was happening during my master's degree, really like just wanted to pursue it and actually go after it. So then fortunately ended up in the position of being an intern at Rhinos. Before I was an intern at the university with a load of different sports teams. I was just working with all the university sports teams from women's hockey to men's American football, men's rugby league. So it was quite broad and it just gave me a decent perspective on working with different groups of people, which meant that my skills had to sort of adapt between the groups of the people that I was working with as well. Obviously, I had to be very different of how I was with women's hockey to how I was with men's American football team. But yeah, so that was a really good learning process for me as actually a coach to actually blend into the different groups and be able to coach different people. But yeah, then that just meant that when I came out of the Masters, it meant that was what I wanted to do. And thankfully, it sort of right place, right time, ended up at the Rhinos.
Yeah, and does it help the fact that there's a real collaborative approach? You mentioned there about the physio team and then handing players through, but there seems to be a real collaborative approach. We've had Dave Ferguson, we've had Patrick Wood on here, we've had Adam McGretton was on earlier in the season as well. The fact that you guys all are talking, I mean, when I go down to the Bartercard training complex down there, your desks are all facing each other, so there's a constant dialogue going on. Presumably that really helps the whole process run smoothly.
Yeah, that constant dialogue that you talk about as well, but then there's that element of trust as well, that like when we've got guys in rehab that needs one certain thing, we all sort of across it and we're all taking care of it and we're all doing our bit for each individual player that needs each individual thing. But then it's also the collaborative process now with the coach as well that sit like just behind us in the training ground, that then anything that we need from them in terms of getting guys back to the field, end stage rehab, then they're across it as well. So it's just been really good process this year of how everything sort of blended and fitted into it together and worked together.
And obviously data is a huge part of that these days as well, in terms of the GPS and the forces involved with the gum shields and all that sort of thing. That feeds into, gives you allows you to make informed decisions, presumably.
Yeah, so the GPS is a really good tool for us. Like you say, it helps us inform what we're doing with the lads, so we can be guided in terms of the load and managing that properly. And then we have the force decks down there that we use regularly every week. The guys, we put a jump leaderboard up in the gym when the guys are doing a session, and they all get really competitive about how they can try and beat one another on that. But then also in the rehab process, we use the force decks again to, like I mentioned before, measure any sort of deficits that we've got, injured side to uninjured side, through different sort of tests on that. And then, yeah, they can inform our practice in terms of a programming point of view in the gym as well.
And we can't let that slide without getting an answer, because that'll be the first thing I want to. So who jumps the highest then?
So we, at the minute, we measure for something that's called relative peak power. So how much power can the guys actually produce, like relative to their body weight. George Brown, who's been up with us from the academy at the minute, he's the biggest that we've seen so far. Alfie Edgell's always up there. Ash is always up there. Cooper Jenkins. I think you see like the guys on the field that you see, like the sort of explosive players that you see, they're generally the guys that you always see up there. But yeah, George Brown is the one at the minute who's come in and wiped the floor with everybody.
Exciting stuff. I remember Ethan Clark-Wood, when he was on the Knockon effect with Jared and Tom, he was saying that he can't get high scores, and Jared found that surprising because he is an explosive character on the field, and he was just saying the mechanics around where, I don't know whether it's his body shape or whatever, he was saying he was struggling to get the big ones on that.
There is definitely a technique to it. I think it shows you as well who people who are force biased contrasted with people that can actually produce power quickly.
Right.
The guys who are generally force biased can jump the highest because they spend more time on the jump in the actual counter movement process of it, taking their time to go down to the bottom of their position and then applying all that force that they've created in the tension that they can actually jump the highest or be up there around the jump height. But then the relative peak power just shows us how much people can produce in short time constraints. And yeah, George Brown's wiped the floor with everybody. So,
and apart from the obvious, why is that important to have that peak power?
Just so like if you can produce that under time constraints, obviously everything that we do in rugby league is under a time constraint of whether you're trying to bust a tackle or whether you're trying to make a tackle. The time constraints of what you're doing in that are very limited. So trying to be able to produce as much force, as much power as we can in those short time constraints is what we're trying to aim and produce.
Fascinating stuff. And just before we wrap things up, we mentioned Leeds Tykes at the top of the show. Looking forward to the new season. Obviously, stepping up a division back in the third tier.
Yeah, back in the third tier after 2 years in the fourth tier. I'm looking forward to it. We're, like I said before, we're deep in a hole at the minute of 4 weeks into pre-season, needing a break. But no, September the 6th is first game, and I'm looking forward to it. Plymouth at home. So I'm looking forward to getting that. I'm less looking forward to the last game of the year, which means it'll be Plymouth away. So if we can schedule a game on the Friday night or the Saturday on April 27th, 2026, Phil, that would be really handy.
Yeah. There's a lucky omen there because when Stuart Lancaster was in charge of Leeds Tykes and he got them promoted to the top flight of the Premiership, last game of the season was Plymouth away.
Well, that's a good omen, then, isn't it?
So it could be a lucky sign for you there. Well, all the best with that. Good luck with all the rehab stuff. It's been fascinating to hear from you and learn about that. Hopefully, you guys have enjoyed that. A different insight into what goes on behind the scenes at Leeds Rhinos. I think we're all guilty at times of having a real focus on the guys who are out on the field and playing, and rightly so, because there's lads behind the scene working so hard to rehab to get back out there, and they're not forgotten by us here at the Rhinos. They're in the safe hands of our medical and our S&T team, making sure they get back out there. And, we want to see everyone back on the field. We've been really fortunate this year with, look at the strength of our reserve team. We were in action on Friday night against Salford Red Devils here at AMT Henley in the curtain raiser. That side's been so strong this year, and that's, I think, testament to the work you've done, Charlie, and the medical team, keeping everyone on the field. So we'll keep that going. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you on Monday. We'll have the match review of the Salford game when we're taking on the Salford Red Devils here on Friday night at AMT Henley. It's going to be a cracking game. Another Friday night under the lights. We can't wait. Get down here because it's going to be a while before we've got another home game. So come down, get down, give the boys your support, and hopefully we can get back climbing the table. It's building up to a fascinating end of the season. We can't wait. There's some huge games coming up, so make sure you're here to support the boys. Don't forget to give us a subscribe so you can keep in touch with all things Leeds Rhinos. And remember to give us a 5-star review so we can keep climbing those podcast charts. Been great to have you with us, Charlie. We'll see you all on Monday. If not, we'll see you on Friday. Make sure you get down, see the boys at AMT Henley. It's going to be a cracking game against Salford Red Devils. Thanks for joining us.